It was one of those calm summer evenings where the gentle breeze drifted in through the open window, leaving everything still and serene. I had spent the whole day at my grandma's, helping her in the garden, fixing up a few things, and enjoying her company, just like I always did when I visited. Her house was a second home to me, filled with childhood memories, her caring for me and offering a comfort only she could provide. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was worn out, ready to collapse into the guest room bed that she always kept ready for me. I drifted off almost instantly, the quiet night sounds lulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. But something woke me later, though I couldn't immediately tell what it was. It might have been the sensation of the sheets shifting or the faint sound of footsteps on the wooden floor outside my door. I blinked, groggy and confused, the dim glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Sleep still clouded my senses, but then I heard it again, the gentle creak of the door easing open. My heart began to beat faster, though I wasn't scared. It was probably just Grandma, checking in on me like she used to when I was a kid. I could picture her in her nightgown, moving quietly through the house, making sure I was snug and safe. It was a habit she had never outgrown. Even now that I was older, I decided to keep my eyes shut, pretending to sleep, curious about what she might do next. Maybe it was childish, but I found comfort in the thought of her still watching over me like that. I heard the soft rustle of her clothing as she entered the room, her steps measured and careful. The air shifted slightly as she neared the bed, and I sensed her standing beside me, motionless. I slowed my breathing, trying to keep it even, though my pulse quickened, a strange anticipation growing inside me. I wasn't sure why, but the idea of her being so close, observing me while I rested, stirred something in me that I couldn't fully understand. Then I felt it, the gentle tug of her fingers on the blanket, pulling it up just a bit, as though ensuring I was tucked in properly. Her touch was light, almost reverent, and I could still feel the warmth of her hand as she smoothed the fabric. My body tensed briefly but soon relaxed, comforted by the familiarity of it. Still, there was something different about this moment, something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Her hand lingered longer than usual, and I could sense her gaze on me, even with my eyes closed. Now fully awake, I kept my breathing slow, maintaining the illusion of sleep, while a curious tension built inside me. Her hand moved again, this time brushing softly against my arm, as if making sure I wasn't chilly. But the way her fingers trailed over my skin sent a shiver through me, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. The touch was slow, deliberate, far more intimate than anything I'd ever felt from her before. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening, while my body reacted instinctively to her touch in ways I didn't fully grasp. Her fingers continued their slow path, and I could hear her breathing steady and soft, like she was lost in her thoughts or perhaps something more. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last, and I couldn't shake the confusing swirl of emotions within me, uncertainty, curiosity, and a feeling I couldn't quite define. I lay there, motionless, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to turn over, to meet her gaze and ask her what she was doing, but another part was too afraid to break the silence, too entranced by this strange, unfolding moment to bring it to an end. She shifted closer, the bed dipping slightly as she sat down beside me. I felt the warmth of her body through the blanket, the gentle weight of her presence grounding me in this surreal situation. Her hand, no longer occupied with the blanket, found my arm again, this time with more intent, her fingers slowly tracing up to my shoulder. My breath caught, and I fought to keep up the appearance of sleep, while my body responded to her touch in ways I couldn't control. Her movements were careful, deliberate, and I realized that this wasn't some accidental gesture, there was intent behind it, a purpose I hadn't expected. Her warm palm came to rest lightly against my chest right above my heart, and for a moment I wondered if she could feel its erratic rhythm. My skin tingled where her hand touched, and I sensed an unspoken weight in the room, a tension that seemed almost tangible, filling the space around us. She leaned in closer, her warm breath tickling my ear, and I heard the faint rustle as she settled beside me. Her hand, which had been resting on my chest, began to move lower, tracing slow, deliberate circles on my skin. My mind spun, tangled in a web of thoughts and emotions I couldn't control. What was she doing? And why wasn't I stopping her? The question echoed through my mind, but my body remained still, caught in the strange magnetic pull of the moment. Her touch grew bolder as her hand slid further down, lingering at the edge of the blanket before slipping beneath it. The feeling of her fingers on my bare skin was both startling and electrifying, and I bit my lip to keep from gasping. Her movements were deliberate, and with each second, the line between reality and what I thought was impossible seemed to blur. I had no idea how much time had passed, but it felt as though the outside world had ceased to exist, leaving only the two of us in this charged, quiet space. Her hand continued to wander, tracing patterns on my skin that sparked sensations through me. She shifted closer, her weight pressing into the mattress as she bent over me, her breath now brushing against my neck. I felt the lightest touch of her lips against my skin, so gentle I might have imagined it if not for the lingering warmth. The sensation sent a shiver down my spine, and I let out a small, involuntary sound, a quiet gasp that broke the silence between us. Her hand hesitated, as if waiting for a response, but when I didn't move, she continued, her touch growing more insistent. By now, the air in the room felt thick with tension, and I could almost hear the electric crackle between us, infusing every breath, every movement. It was as if she was testing the boundaries, seeing how far she could go, and I was caught in the current, unable or perhaps unwilling to push her away. Her touch grew more intimate, and my body responded in ways I hadn't anticipated, my heart racing, my breathing uneven. Her hand ventured lower, and I felt her presence pressing down on me, her fingers tracing a path that left me breathless. My mind became a storm of confusion, desire, and something else I couldn't identify. I wanted to speak, to ask her what she was doing, but the words refused to form. Instead, I stayed motionless, pretending to sleep, my body betraying me with every slight shift, every barely hidden reaction. She was so near that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, sense the quiet determination in her touch as her hand continued its slow, deliberate exploration. Each touch felt like a question, and my silence seemed to answer them, one after another, though I had no idea what those answers meant. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved, and I found myself sinking deeper into the moment, letting the rhythm of her touch lead me. Time seemed to stretch and slow, and I couldn't tell how long we stayed like that, just the two of us, wrapped in the stillness of the night, our breaths the only sound in the room. Her hand, initially hesitant, grew more confident, and I could feel the weight of her intentions pressing on me like a tangible force. My thoughts raced, caught between a need to understand what was happening and an overwhelming desire to let it continue. Then she began to lift my nightdress, her fingers exploring my bare skin, touching places that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. Her lips pressed softly against my skin, trailing down my legs and across other parts of my body. I couldn't bring myself to speak or move, so I found myself giving in to the sensations, enjoying the moment despite my confusion. After what felt like an eternity, she withdrew her hand, slipping away from my body. The absence of her touch left me feeling both relieved and strangely empty. I heard the quiet rustle of her clothes as she stood, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her weight as she moved away from the bed. I remained lying there, my heart still pounding, uncertain of what had just happened or what it all meant. The significance of it was beyond my grasp, at least for now, as my mind swirled with emotions, torn between the familiar person she was and the new, unsettling feelings she had awakened in me. Pretending to remain asleep, I couldn't stop replaying every second of her touch in my mind, the way her fingers had traced my skin as if she knew exactly what she was doing. It left me aching with questions I couldn't voice and a yearning I hadn't known I possessed. The room, now returned to quiet, felt different, like the very air had changed, thick with a tension that refused to dissipate. My body still burned with the memory of her warmth, and I realized that there was no going back to how things had been. As her footsteps grew fainter down the hallway, I couldn't shake the sense that she hadn't entirely left, that some part of her still lingered in the air around me. The bed felt colder, emptier without her presence, and I found myself wishing she would return, that she would finish whatever it was she had started. My heart quickened at the thought, and I resented how much I craved that closeness again. But what could I do? I was trapped in my confusion, unsure whether to confront her or let it become an unspoken secret between us, something I would carry alone in the silence of the night. Yet even amid my uncertainty, the intensity of the moment still simmered within me. A part of me yearned for more, wished she would come back to continue what she had begun. That desire pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe, and I knew that no matter how much I tried to push it away, it would stay with me. My thoughts drifted back to the memory of her fingers on my skin, recalling how she had hesitated at first before growing bolder, more certain in her movements. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, as if she had wanted it just as much as I did. The realization sent a shiver through me, and once again my body responded to the lingering memory of her touch. I shifted beneath the blanket, the fabric clinging to me, a reminder of how vulnerable I had felt under her gaze. My mind replayed the moment when she had leaned closer, her breath warm against my neck, her lips just barely brushing my skin. There had been a hesitation in her movements, as though she was gauging my reaction, waiting for some signal. And I hadn't stopped her. That realization struck me harder than I thought it would. I hadn't pulled back or pushed her away, even though I knew I should have. Instead, I allowed her to continue, let her touch blur the boundaries between what was right and wrong, between what was acceptable and what crossed the line. The room suddenly felt too small, charged with the intensity of what had just happened. My body was still on edge, alive with the memory of her touch, and I knew there was no chance of falling back asleep. The quiet of the house was stifling, but it was nothing compared to the silence inside my mind, where unanswered questions and unspoken desires echoed louder than ever. What had happened between us tonight? What did it mean for our future? And why, despite all the confusion, did I yearn so intensely for her to come back, to cross that line again, to take me even deeper into this unknown? As I lay there, struggling with the swirl of emotions inside me, I heard her footsteps again. My pulse quickened, and part of me wondered if she was returning. The thought sent a rush of heat through me, my breath catching. I wasn't sure what I'd do if she came back into the room. If her touch found me again, would I allow it, let her cross that line once more, or would I stop her this time? The unspoken tension between us was unbearable, and the anticipation gnawed at me. But the footsteps stopped, and the silence stretched out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering memory of her touch. In the quiet that followed, reality began to seep in, pushing back the intensity of the moment. My mind cleared, and the haze of desire lifted just enough for me to grasp the weight of what had happened. This was my grandma, the woman who had cared for me my entire life, someone I trusted completely. Yet tonight, something between us had shifted in a way that could never be undone. My heart ached with that realization, knowing that things could never return to how they had been. Even if nothing else happened, this moment would always linger between us, a silent reminder of how close we had come to crossing a dangerous line. I had no idea what would come next or how I would face her in the morning, but I knew one thing for certain: tonight had changed everything. Whether I wanted to accept it or not, something deeper had awakened inside me, a desire that wouldn't easily fade. But as I lay there in the stillness, I realized that no answers would come tonight. I would have to live with the questions, with the haunting memory of her touch, and with the unspoken connection that now bound us, a connection that would linger long after the night was over. Even as I tried to push those thoughts aside, I couldn't escape the vivid memory of her touch. My skin still burned from the heat of her fingers, the deliberate way she moved, the image of her standing over me, and the gentle brush of her lips against my neck played over and over in my mind, twisting something deep within me. I couldn't deny the pull I felt, the strange craving for something I knew I shouldn't want. It clawed at me, making it impossible to think clearly. Part of me longed for her to return, to feel that connection again, to cross that line completely, free from the constraints of what was right. My pulse raced as the dark intensity of those unspoken desires grew stronger with each passing second. In that moment, I understood the dangerous allure of the forbidden, how it pulled me in like a flame, threatening to consume me entirely. The harder I fought against it, the more powerful the temptation became, leaving me trapped in a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't control. I knew that things between us could never go back to the way they were, but I couldn't ignore how much I craved her touch, to feel that spark that had ignited earlier. The night seemed heavy with possibilities, a tension pressing down on me like a weight. And no matter how much I tried to suppress the yearning inside me, I knew that this wasn't over, not yet. This moment, this night, had stirred something deep within me, something that could no longer be kept hidden.